Welcome to AI for You. Today's use case is about using AI to help you maintain your brand voice across all of your creative. Whether you're writing ad copy, your social posts, email campaigns, or landing pages, it can be a challenge to keep everything sounding like it came from the same team, especially when you're juggling multiple projects and audiences. Start by giving the AI tool of your choice the key elements of your brand voice, your brand guidelines, tone descriptors, a few examples of content that really nails your voice, any words or phrases you always use or always avoid, and then ask it to act as a brand voice editor. Give it a piece of draft content, whether you wrote it or the AI did, and ask it to revise the content to align with your brand while preserving the core message. Then ask it to flag anything that feels off brand and explain why. What I love about this approach is that you're not asking AI to write for you. You're using it as a quality check to make sure that everything that goes out the door sounds like your institution. It's especially useful if you have multiple people creating content across different channels and you need to get consistency without bottlenecking everything to go through one person. As always, the full prompt will be in the show notes for this episode. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Dakota Story and Sarah Martin. Dakota is an art director at Ologie, where he brings a writer's perspective to creative strategy and brand storytelling. Sarah is a freelance graphic designer and formerly an art director at Ologie with a sharp eye for visual design and a passion for exploring how new tools can enhance the creative process. Together, they bring a really unique perspective on what it looks like to integrate AI into deeply human, deeply creative work without losing what makes that work matter. Let's jump right in. Dakota and Sarah, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. So we'll jump right into the questions. And I think this is going to be a unique episode because you both work in disciplines that are deeply human, right? Very creative, graphic design and storytelling. So when AI first showed up in your worlds, what made you think that it might actually be something that belongs in the creative process and actually helped you with the work that you were doing?
I think I went into the whole AI thing very anti AI. I did not like the idea of it. Part of it was probably a pride thing, like, oh, no way a robot is going to take my job. And out of the gate, I think too, the discourse around the potential for AI didn't necessarily match up with the quality yet. So I didn't feel that urgency to get involved. But as time went on, seeing the advancements, seeing larger companies like Coca-Cola incorporating it in big time campaigns, it felt like a foregone conclusion that AI in some shape or form would work its way into our creative process. So then just became a challenge of figuring out how to make it work in our line of work. And I think that's when, some of those potential practical use cases started presenting themselves, is just playing around with it a little bit more.
Absolutely, Sarah.
Yeah, literally everything Dakota said, totally agree with it. I think like going off of what he just said was like the real turning point was when I stopped asking like can AI do what I do and just started asking like what parts of my job do I actually hate and what can I make it do for me? I know like nobody in graphic design, like no one chose to do it because they loved, necessarily exporting a bunch of different sizes of the same file. I know I sure didn't. And nobody, studied visual design, just generating a bunch of mood board variations that a client will probably reject. So when AI started handling some of that stuff, like kind of well, it didn't feel super threatening. It felt like Dakota and I say, like, it feels like a really eager, kind of scrappy intern. And so we use that framing a lot as, AI is the intern and you are the creative director. The intern definitely does not set the vision. They don't decide, what the work means or what the story is really trying to tell. But if you give it a really solid brief, they can take a lot of that grunt, dirty work that you don't necessarily want to do. So you can focus on the stuff that requires a lot of real taste and judgment. And so that's when I started exploring it more and becoming a little bit more open to the idea.
So I love that framing, right? And I hear that a lot. AI is an intern, right? And it takes off the work off your plate that you don't want to be doing. What does that actually look like in practice on the creative side, like in your work as you're moving through?
From a writing perspective, there are two ways into incorporating AI, and neither are incorrect. I think it's just a preference thing, but like one would be write first. Are you writing the first draft with AI supporting the before and after? Or two would be prompt first. Are you prompting AI to write the first draft and refining from there? Brian, you said this earlier. I agree. Like, I still don't like the idea of using AI to do the actual writing for me. But again, that's a personal preference because the actual writing part is the part I enjoy doing. So for me, I think it's less, hey, write this for me, and more, hey, make it more efficient for me to write. So in that vein, I use it for things like brainstorming, researching, deep analysis, that kind of thing. Even social listening, some of these models are getting good at summarizing longer documents or formatting and editing, kind of like Grammarly style. That is a gift because that is not a gift that I have. Fact checking, and then it's honestly just like a super Google. Like I use it for thesaurus, synonyms, definitions. It's kind of like Sarah was talking about earlier, all the things around the writing that normally take up more time, but using AI can kind of make that process more efficient. And then I have more time to do the actual thing that I enjoy, which is the writing.
Totally. It's more of like a support and it helps you not worry. Like, for example, like Photoshop's generative fill has saved me so much time just like extending an image. I really think on the design side, I try to keep AI, at the very beginning of a project and at the very end. So, not necessarily in the middle where real decisions are happening. But early on, like I was saying earlier, it's great for finding specific styles for mood boards, exploring different visual directions, maybe testing out an illustration style before you've committed any real resources to creating that work. Like tools like Adobe Firefly and Photoshop's GenFill that I just talked about, those are genuinely like throughout my workflow now. Firefly is great for early stage concepting. Same with Gemini. I've been using that a lot. It can do a lot of great things. Nano Banana is just so fun to play with. Generative fill is really a lifesaver. I love that. But yeah, all of those tools are just really awesome with the early exploration stage without spending a ton of time, making stuff for mood boards. Then the client might just hate it and you wasted a lot of time making something, which I've been there many times.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the way that you're thinking about, like, we're seeing AI more and more in all the tools that we're used to using, and really being open and understanding like how to prompt and what to ask for, and how to communicate with these tools to leverage all that potential out of them. Because if someone that doesn't know what they're doing with generative fill and doesn't know how to talk to these tools goes in there and just asks for something that's confuses the tool or isn't quite precise enough, that's when they look at it and say, "Oh, this is horrible. This is crap." But I tell you, I am so happy that I will never again have to pull something out of the background in Photoshop manually. It's just such a painful process. And then, Dakota, you were talking about the writing process. So I'm a writer. I was a creative writing major in school. So I enjoy, like you said, I enjoy that process of the actual writing, the creativity. But there are so many things that AI that can do that make that so much easier and so much more helpful. So I can spend that time in the process instead of doing all that other ancillary stuff that I don't enjoy doing anyway. But there are so many creatives out there that experiment a little bit with the tools, or they play with something, or they just like, they don't get the results that they see, they don't get the outputs that they want. What do you think creatives are doing wrong that they're not seeing that same opportunity and value add that you're seeing, or not doing, maybe not wrong, but that they aren't doing right, that would be helpful for them?
If you want to test AI's writing ability and sort of test a workflow with AI and sort of further understand how to work with AI better, it's really helpful to start super small. And, I think of something like an email and, go into your model of choice, ask what you needed to write. Say it's an email, right? And you kind of say, hey, write this email for me. And I think a lot of it is including the most detailed creative brief that you possibly can. here's the email topic, here's the audience that it's for, here are the content bullet points that I want you to include, here are sources to pull that content from, voice considerations, the call to action, how long it should be, what the format should be. It's really about as being as detailed as possible. The more detailed you can make your prompt, the better that first output will be. And then from there, it's just about refining. And I think it's just reframing how you're using it. I don't think it's a magic shortcut. I don't think it ever will be. I think it's just more about, where am I in the process of whatever I'm writing? How can I use this to help me? And then go from there. So I think it's just resetting your expectations. And like you said, learning how to talk to these prompts, these models with prompts, whether that's being more detailed or, learning how to give it better feedback. Nailing those two things, you'll see your outputs improve.
Yeah, it's really important to not skip any of those things. I think like a really big assumption is that like being faster automatically means better, and it just is not the case. And speed without judgment creates a lot of risk, especially in the creative space and design. I think we've probably all seen, AI generated faces used in real campaigns just because they're faster and way cheaper than having a full blown photo shoot. You see images that go out with those crazy, scary, warped hands and different, body parts, different duplicated textures that just, don't look quite right. Same with lighting. And, that's because no one actually looked or knew what to specifically look for when they're using these tools. And that's where things can go really sideways. And it's not just because AI was involved, it was because, the designer, creative director stopped, paying attention to those things. And at the end of the day, they need to be making the final call always.
Yeah, that human in the loop is like, and especially for a creative pursuit, because that requires a different level of taste and judgment and understanding. And so often, like I love Midjourney because you can go on their website and look through all the different images that have been created and see like what prompts were used. And the really good images tend to have much more detailed prompts that talk about focal length and coloring and composition. And those are things that only a designer, like I can't go and I'm not a designer. I couldn't go in there and do that. But then on the writing side, like I can go in and I can talk about exposition and foreshadowing and alignment and character development and all those other things that, a generic prompt is not going to capture all of those. So that's where I think, AI really helps kind of augment our expertise and our capability and even our creativity. I talk to so many creatives who are just opposed to the idea of using any of these tools because they either feel like it's devaluing the craft, the time that they've put in to learn all this, the expertise that they have, or that if they use these tools they're going to become less creative because they're not engaging those muscles to figure out, like, to experience that friction at different points that sometimes AI can help relieve. How do you think about that when you're talking to other creatives?
First of all, I'll say I completely understand the hesitancy around it. And, I think there's ethical concerns that people are completely valid in having. And it can be very overwhelming with how fast things are changing. And there's so much content about AI out there. There's so much horrible slop being produced, I think the mindset around it just has to shift. And I kind of had to go through it too. Like, it's not a replacement for craft or even a creative human. I'd think of it more as it's an opportunity for creatives to kind of shift their role a little bit, almost become more of a creative director. And it's an opportunity to supplement your existing skill set with, something that can fill in your own shortcomings. I think it's just about figuring out how to best pair it with your personal workflow. That's why it's going to be different for everybody. Like Sarah said, what do you hate to do and what can it do for you? Just so that you can keep enjoying the thing that you like to do, right? And you don't have to sacrifice your edge in that specific vertical. So again, like if you look at whatever AI model you're using as your intern, something that can complete these nominal tasks for you, the whole idea of it becomes more palatable and it breaks down that resistance a bit. I even think about it like the jump from going to the library to being able to use Google. And I think now it's just like that leap from Google to using these AI models. It's just that leap in technology makes things more efficient, but you don't have to necessarily sacrifice anything on the craft side. And I also think, people can take comfort in knowing AI still isn't great at original thought or big idea thinking. Like it can spit out 100 ideas or solutions with varying degrees of plausibility, but a human still needs to evaluate those options and find the best one. So I think it's less about like where is AI going to encroach in what I do and more about how can I use it to supplement what I don't like doing and give me more opportunity to do what I like to do.
Yeah, I have a pretty long answer for this one. I think Dakota touched on this, and I might have touched on it a little bit earlier, but something to always remember, at least right now, like everything is changing so fast. The programs and things are coming out literally like every day. It seems like it's really crazy. But right now, AI really does not understand context and it doesn't understand audience. And again, it doesn't have good taste. But what it does help you do well is move faster through those early exploratory stages, generating those concepts and testing directions really quickly. But again, design still needs to have a human at the wheel. And like the fear that craft is being devalued, I think that's super real and needs to be taken seriously. But I think it's also interesting. I think what's also happening as, AI generated visuals are becoming more and more common. Human touch has become increasingly more valuable and not less. So, when everything starts looking the same and like it came from the same machine, because it probably is, it feels, not genuine. It doesn't feel intentional. And that's going to start standing out in a bad way. So, audiences can already tell when something feels off, even if they can't necessarily put a finger on it. That instinct is only going to get sharper over time. So, with the designers who really lean into their humanity and their taste and their judgment and their ability to make something that actually connects, those are the people and those are the jobs that are going to really matter most. And like we're seeing this trend right now, especially where things are clearly handmade, people love that. A good example that, I play a lot of video games. Chapel Roan has a Fortnite skin now. There was a big debut video for her. Dakota's laughing at me, but it was really, really beautiful. I highly recommend everyone to watch it, but it blended, handmade stop motion and animation styles into a really cool, unique video that felt like her and her brand, but also felt like very human and intentional. And that's why so many people loved it. Or even I just saw Wuthering Heights recently, and that intro with the title going on screen was actually done with like human hair animation that's real. And that stood out to so many people. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see that trend kind of increase and see more humanity being brought into design.
Yeah, I think that's, one of the things that we're really going to start leaning into. I think like 100% human generated content, I think will be the vinyl of like the next, year or two or something like that, where certain people are just looking for something that is entirely made authentically by a human without any AI in there. But I think most people will be on that hybrid journey where they're using it to augment and elevate so that you can scale your distribution, you can scale your ability to focus on your user. Dakota, you were talking about the importance of taste, right? And how these tools don't have taste, which is especially critical in creative pursuits. I do a lot of like data analysis with AI, and all I have to check is like, I have to spot check the insights that it pulls. And I also have to check any sort of math that it does because it's so bad at that. Using your taste and your judgment to be able to evaluate the outputs, I think is super critical. And, talking about skills that we want people to start focusing on and start thinking about those critical thinking skills. Dakota, you were talking about creators may become more creative directors, right? Where they're looking at variations of several different things that AI has created based on their original inputs. What other skills do you think really matter for creative professionals in higher ed specifically?
The first thing that comes to mind is knowing and being able to spot AI writing in design. I think that's going to be huge just because there's so much AI writing out there and it's becoming easier and easier to spot right away just because there's so much saturation there. You don't even need an AI detector anymore. Honestly, it just kind of stands out. And honestly, like when I spot it, like if I'm reading through something and all of a sudden like, hey, wait a second, this feels familiar. That it's not this, it's that. Here are three very short punctual sentences, or here's a list. I, I stop reading it. To me, it devalues the thinking. It turns me off from whatever's being said, just because if somebody didn't take the effort to learn those tropes so that they could spot them and remove them, I'm less confident in the effort behind the ideas they're trying to present. And I think, Sarah touched on this, but as public fatigue in that low effort AI grows, I think the value of un-AI'd or non-AI writing and design is going to grow. So I think knowing those tropes, becoming familiar with them, using AI more just so that you know what to look for is going to be incredibly valuable. And not necessarily a new skill, but one that I think will gain a lot of value over time is just emotional intelligence, like EQ instead of IQ. I think about if we all have access to all of this intelligence at our fingertips all the time, and intelligence becomes less of a commodity. It's still going to take an emotionally intelligent person to recognize what's going to make something resonate with people, thinking based on experience and situational awareness. And just as a human, it doesn't matter how well these models score on EQ, which is like they measure these models in everything known to man, and one of them is EQ, which is insane. But I just believe humans will always have an edge there, knowing and being able to recognize when AI is being used so that you can sort of undo that. And then just emotional intelligence in general, I think, alongside that handcraftedness that's going to continue to sort of grow in popularity as people sort of bristle at that AI output, I think emotional intelligence is going to be super valuable too.
Totally. Yeah. And I love all of the new handcrafted things or that trend just coming back. I think it's so special. And I think it really like amplifies, the skills that matter more now are always the ones that are hardest to teach and what you go to school for, visual judgment, the really basic design and art principles, compositional skills. And like Dakota was saying, and what I kind of touched on a little bit was being able to look at an AI generated image and just immediately knowing if something's off, even if you can't name it, and maybe, how to fix it. Being able to spot that AI face that's a little bit too perfect and symmetrical, not human like at all, catching, a texture or pattern that repeats, way too much, and noticing, inconsistencies with illustration and things like that. That really only happens if a machine made it and people aren't looking at it. So I think like that critical eye and being able to be that creative director at the end of the day is such a valuable skill right now. And it's something that, AI cannot develop for you.
Looking at the fact that there's been a prediction that by the end of this year, 90% of all content online will be AI generated content, right? It's crazy, but AI just creates so much so fast. Like humans aren't going to create less, but AI can create so much more. So I think, to your point, Dakota, being like really leaning into our humanity and our like the emotional, the empathy, the vulnerability, the creativity, the innovation, all those things that AI is not good at, and trying to make sure that we embody those in our creativity, I think is critical. A question for you, Sarah, talking about the handcrafted. Do you think AI is going to create a turn back to the handwritten word? Is cursive coming back? Is AI going to make cursive come back?
Maybe, like, honestly, like, I love, like, there's so many, like, the Wuthering Heights example is a great example of that. I know, like, in the stuff that we do, like, hand-drawn illustrations are, like, a huge thing right now. Just different styles. Like, I just love seeing all of these trends coming back and people loving them, even if it's on Instagram, like, just people sharing their work that's handmade. It gets shared so much more, and there's just a much deeper appreciation for it, I think, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. If you were working with a team of higher ed creatives, so let's say a designer, a writer, and a marketer, what's one small project that they could get started with just to experiment with AI in their workflows?
One exercise Sarah and I had been talking about is like somehow generating, four different things, whether that's some kind of ad or whether it's an email or somebody, takes the position of I'm going to generate these four things and then as a group sort of go through and try to identify the ones that were generated by AI versus the one, that was created by a human or went through an AI process and was un-AI'd, like a spot the slop kind of thing. I think that's a great exercise just because, along with knowing the basics to these things, I think one of the most important things, especially on the writing side, is going to be like being able to identify these things, these tropes that it uses, and the lack of correct information, or whether it's plagiarism or the hallucinations, or there's so many things that can go wrong, or missteps or pitfalls to using this AI, even though it can make things so much more efficient. There's so much you have to watch out for. Along with what I was talking about earlier, of just starting on a small task and just seeing and practicing going through the basics. I think the next step is just being able to practice identifying that AI, generated grossness, and learn how, if you can learn how to spot that, like your outputs will be better depending on how you're using it. But that's where I would start. It's just some kind of like, let's all get on the same page about how we're using this, where we used it, and keep ourselves honest about, hey, I spotted this. If I spotted it, somebody else is going to spot it. Especially coming from, colleges and universities, I laugh at students started using AI to write all their papers, in colleges just hammered students for it. And now the shoe's kind of on the other foot, where it's like, if a student sees like a college putting out anything AI generated, I can't even imagine. So it's like, there is risk, but if you get like really good at spotting it, you're going to be fine.
Yeah, that's actually so funny. Yeah, students lose their mind when they see anything AI generated from, leadership or the university as a whole. Something that I honestly am just a big proponent of is just exploring all of the different platforms that exist and just experimenting with like Nano Banana, which is such a crazy name, by the way. It's so cool because like you can take existing designs and have it animate it in unique ways or try different things with that really quickly without spending the time. I'm terrible at animation. Like that is something that I do not like. I never want to do that. Like I'm not good at it. I will leave it for the animators to do. But being able to quickly animate something to show a client to react to before we give it to an animator to make, I think is great. So I think just exploring a lot of different things and different platforms can get you a sense of their capabilities because they can all do different things. Like Adobe Firefly is great at image generation or illustration generation, and Adobe Photoshop's really good at removing things, and Nano Banana is really good at animating. Firefly is not great at animating right now. I've tried and it makes the craziest things ever. So I think exploring all of that is really important just to get familiar with it. I think an exercise that you could do as a designer could be, I know like maybe you're making a social post, or maybe it could be really anything, a campaign, an ad. Maybe just have a rough design and input it into Banana or Firefly and see what generations it can make of it, just to see its capabilities and kind of get used to it and implementing it in your workflow by just quickly being able to see what layouts might work, what might not work, and just experimenting with that. I think that's a really great way to kind of ease into it. I just love exploring. I think that's a really great thing for designers to just start off doing right off the bat.
I think experimentation and exploration is so critical with any of these tools because no one really knows like what the full capabilities are and what they can do. And if you don't like experiment and fail a lot, then you're never going to get to that point where you've got that quality that you've been looking for. You both mentioned like trust, right? The ability to lose trust because you're putting out content that is AI generated. What advice do you have for higher ed creative teams to make sure that they like whatever they create with these tools encompasses their brand voice and captures their brand voice, their overall brand style without putting them in a position where they're going to lose trust or where they're going to lose their humanity that gets pulled out of the work. Like, what principles do you use to guide those decisions of where you use AI and how you use it that you could pass along for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is just having the agreed upon baseline of like, this is what our brand voice is and should sound like, and this is our personality. Like having a brand guidelines where all of those things are outlined. It's not only great for, bringing new people on and getting them familiar with the brand, but keeping you honest too about what do we sound like? What should we sound like to other people? How do we show up in the world? And I think having that North Star is just as important, if not more important now. But then the number one thing in my mind is just to never let any untouched AI output be a final deliverable. Don't take that shortcut poison pill where it's like, oh, this made my life so much easier. Like if you do that, it could make your life a lot harder down the road. So I think there always has to be some kind of human oversight. So whether that's more objective quality control, things like fact checking or checking for plagiarism, revoicing manually or untroping the writing, or it's more subjective evaluating. Does this feel human? Does it feel natural? Does it feel AI generated? I think putting anything out there with any remnant of AI as it becomes more and more frowned upon and more easily detectable, it's just a minefield. And honestly, that is something to find comfort in. First of all, is like people still want to read things written by other people. They don't want to consume all this robot content. But also, it's just something to keep in mind depending on how much actual writing you'll have an AI do. It's just like, what do I want to consume from a content perspective? If I'm consuming something, that is clearly AI written or generated, how does that make me feel? What is my reaction to it? I think I said earlier, like I stop right away. I'm like, oh my God, gross. I want to hear like from you, not like what you told your AI agent to tell me. So I think that's, have that North Star, know who you are as a brand, and then make sure that there is no pure AI going out anywhere. There has to be some kind of human oversight.
Well, Dakota stole my answer. But I will say it really does not matter how sophisticated, the tool is. It doesn't matter how fast it generated something. If the visual doesn't feel like it was made, for a real human who genuinely, care about the institution, it's probably going to fail. People can spot that like right away. And again, higher ed institutions aren't judged on how like efficiently they can generate visuals. They're really judged on, what they put into the world, making sure that it feels clear, considered, and very human. So I think like it's so important to keep your judgment and creative skills in the driver's seat always. You're always the creative director. Everything needs to be overseen by a human before it's put out. So I think it's really important to make all of those standards very explicit. And again, just never ship out an AI output without having a real eye on it first.
I always finish the episodes by asking you what one use case is most helpful to you, either in your personal or professional life, whether that's prompt you use, a custom GPT, like whatever format that takes.
Tool wise, my favorite writing tool just to experiment with and play around with, just to see like where is the edge of how good these things are getting at writing, is with Claude. I think Claude is the strongest out of the box writer. I think ChatGPT is just not there. I think it's lagging behind. So like if you're looking for like what's the edge of what am I competing against, what's the edge of that? I think you go to Claude. What I use AI the most for, like I said, is like one, super Google, whether that's like researching or quick things. It's basically replaced Google for me. And then the other thing is just like, don't tell the in-house editor here, but I use it for editing like crazy, whether that's like grammar, or I'm known to have a run-on sentence, or, a dangling participle, or whatever it might be. Like if you know your weaknesses as a writer, or where you tend to naturally fall into things that are not necessarily correct. We write for a lot of different colleges and universities, and they'll all have different standards, so whether it's AP or Chicago, you can tell these models like, hey, look at this from this specific standard and let me know, edit it from that direction. So there's a lot of ways that these things are like making the end process of writing more efficient, making sure everything feels clear and concise, like looking for those kind of things too. So, I mean, big ideas and the initial input still is like where I like to be, but editing and refining and making sure it's like a second eye, that's kind of where I'm leaning right now.
I really only use it at like the very beginning stages when I'm like stuck or just exploring different things. I think it's really useful for that. And then again, like at the end stages, like maybe you're making a billboard or something, and last minute you notice that there's like a blemish that you want to get rid of on someone's face, or maybe there's a distracting thing in the background. That can do that so quickly, and it just saves so much time. In terms of like tools, I agree with Dakota about Claude, and I'm definitely going to tell the editor about that. Just kidding. But Claude is really, really great at spotting things and being an eye, honestly, for creative, which is really wild to me. It is really fun to explore and use. I will say, like, in terms of a visual standpoint, Nano Banana has been one that I just keep going back to. I know that there's tools like Midjourney, and I mean, the list goes on and on. I don't like paying for a lot of AI tools, so I try to stick to the ones that I already have. So, Adobe Firefly, I know that there's, a limit with credits and things like that, but that's always available through having like an Adobe like account and subscription. Not sponsored, by the way. I think there's just a lot of different ways you can use it and explore, but Nano Banana has been one that's been really, really fun to use.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for coming on. If our audience wants to follow you, find you, or learn more about you, where's the best place for them to do that?
For me, I guess LinkedIn. Not big on Instagram, so I think LinkedIn is probably fine. Or my email. I don't know if the bio will have my email in there, but that works too.
Yeah, email LinkedIn or Instagram. It's at Sarah Martin Media. Dakota.
Just kind of big on Instagram. If you haven't seen it already, just look for it. It's super easy.
Yeah, I like to post, creative content and trends and things like that. So people could follow me there. It's pretty easy to get in contact with me there.
Awesome. Well, love the content there. Love what you both are doing and how you're focusing on exploring AI in creativity. So thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having us. This was awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much, man. This is great.
What a great conversation. I love the way Dakota and Sarah think about AI in the creative process. Their framing of AI as an eager, scrappy intern that you're directing rather than deferring to is such a practical way to think about these tools, especially for creatives who are still figuring out where AI fits. Sarah's approach of keeping AI at the very beginning and very end of a project, but not in the middle where the real creative decisions happen, is a framework any creative team could adapt tomorrow. And then Dakota's point about never letting untouched AI output be a final deliverable is something that every institution should take to heart. As he put it, if someone didn't take the effort to learn the tropes and spot them, it undermines confidence in the thinking behind the work. I was also struck by their observation that as AI generated content becomes more common, the value of human crafted work is actually going up, not down. That's an encouraging message for anyone worried about what these tools mean for creative careers. The skills that matter most now, taste, judgment, emotional intelligence, the ability to spot when something feels off, those are the things that are hardest to teach and impossible to automate. And I think their advice for getting started is spot on. Start small, pick the tasks you don't enjoy, learn how to talk to these tools, and always, always keep a human in the driver's seat. Please reach out to me with ways that you're integrating AI into your professional and personal lives. And as always, blue skies and keep creating.